The Korean Mafia boss's daughter was born deaf. Until the black waitress pulled out something that shocked him. He was the most feared man in Seoul's underworld, a Korean Mafia boss who could end a life with a phone call, a career with a whisper. But there was one silence Min-seok couldn't break. His daughters. For 7 years, Hyun hadn't spoken, hadn't heard, hadn't connected with the world around her, or so Min-seok believed. The best specialists in Seoul and abroad had used words like irreversible, non-responsive, lost cause. But then came one night at Maison Ara, Seoul's most exclusive restaurant, and a black waitress named Amaka, who was breaking every rule just by being there. She didn't bring him wine. She pulled something strange from her apron, something small, something silver, something that looked almost laughably simple. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It shattered everything Min-seok thought he knew about his daughter, and made the most dangerous man in Gangnam realize his greatest enemy wasn't his rivals. It was his own ignorance. The rain hadn't reached Seoul yet, but the city glittered like broken glass under the night sky, all neon and shadow and secrets. Inside Maison Ara, the air was thick with the scent of imported truffles, aged whiskey, and something else, something Amaka had learned to recognize in her first month working there. Fear. She adjusted her apron, tucking a stray lock behind her ear as her fingers trembled slightly. Mr. Park, the restaurant manager, was sweating through his pressed white shirt, and that was never a good sign. Amaka. His voice came out tight, urgent. He grabbed her wrist near the kitchen pass, his grip just a little too firm. Table by the window. You, now. Her stomach dropped. Isn't that the VIP table? I thought. Don't think. Mr. Park's eyes darted toward the dining room, then back to her. Don't talk to him. Don't smile too much. Don't make sudden moves. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a trembling whisper. And whatever you do, don't touch the child. Amaka's eyes flicked toward the main dining room through the small window in the kitchen door. She saw him instantly. Min-seok sat like he owned the air around him. Broad shoulders, filling out a black suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. Hands folded on the table as if violence was just another form of patience. Tattoos slipped above his collar, barely visible. Secrets etched in ink. Across from him sat a little girl in a pink dress. Shoulders hunched forward. Small hands pressed hard against her ears. Hyun. She was crying. Silent tears sliding down her cheeks while her body trembled like she was trying to block out a sound nobody else could hear. And Min-seok's face. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was embarrassed. Amaka grabbed the water pitcher, her heart hammering against her ribs. Just pour the water. Don't look him in the eye. She crossed the dining room. The ambient chatter of wealthy diners, deal-makers, and socialites laughing like the world couldn't touch them, seemed to dim as she approached table by the window. Good evening, sir, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Sparkling or still? Min-seok didn't look up from the menu in his hands. Still. No ice. Amaka poured with surgical precision, the water streaming into his glass without a single splash. She moved to Hyun's side. As the water filled the girl's glass, Hyun wasn't watching the liquid. She was staring at the base of the crystal, mesmerized by the vibrations traveling through it. Her small fingers reached out, touching the glass delicately, as if searching for something inside it. Stop that. Min-seok's voice cut through the air, low and strict. Hyun's face crumpled. Her breath caught. Min-seok grabbed his daughter's wrist and pulled it away from the glass. I said stop. Act like... He didn't finish the sentence, but the insult hung in the air, heavy and cruel. The words left Amaka's mouth before she could stop them. She's trying to calm herself. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Min-seok's head turned slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers like a verdict being read. Mr. Park, watching from across the room, looked like he might collapse. You speak, Min-seok said, his voice lethally quiet. Amaka swallowed hard, gripping the pitcher so tight her knuckles went pale. Not disrespectfully, sir. The water creates vibrations when it pours. She can feel it. It's grounding her. Minsok stared at her like she'd stepped into traffic without looking. My daughter is deaf, he said, each word deliberate, controlled. She doesn't understand anything. She doesn't hear. She lives in a world of... She understands more than you think, Amaka interrupted quietly, surprising even herself. She's overwhelmed. A few nearby diners were watching now, pretending not to, but watching. Minsok's jaw tightened. He was a man used to absolute control. And yet this waitress, this stranger who should have been invisible, was speaking to him as if he was just a father making the wrong choice. Hyun's panic was rising, and her small shoulders shook harder, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then her hand knocked the glass. It didn't shatter, but it hit the table with a sharp vibration that rippled through the wood. Hyun jolted like she'd been struck. She stood up in her chair, trembling, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream. A raw, helpless cry, high-pitched and untrained. The voice of a child who couldn't hear herself. People flinched. Minsok's chair scraped back violently, his hand lifted, not to strike, but in the desperate reflex of a man who had never learned what comfort looked like. Amaka moved, not thinking, not calculating. She stepped between Minsok and his daughter. "Don't," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Please." Minsok froze, not because he was afraid of her, because no one ever told him don't. A bodyguard near the wall shifted, his hand moving toward his jacket. The entire restaurant had gone silent, watching the impossible. A waitress standing between Seoul's most dangerous man and his breaking point. Amaka didn't reach for Hyun. She didn't try to restrain her or force calm into a nervous system on fire. She reached into her apron. Every bodyguard in the room tensed. Minsok's eyes narrowed. "What are you—" Amaka pulled out a small case, worn, soft, clearly old. And from it, she lifted something that looked almost laughably simple, a medical tuning fork, weighted and silver, the metal clean and purposeful. Minsok blinked. "What is that?" Amaka didn't answer. She struck the tuning fork gently against the padded edge of her tray. "Hello, my friends and loved ones. Thanks for joining me on this beautiful story. As we continue this story, kindly take a moment to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and I love to always hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it at your end right now? Thank you for subscribing. But to understand why Amaka was carrying that tuning fork in her apron, why she recognized what no one else could see in Hyun's panic, and why she was willing to risk everything for a child she'd never met before, you have to go back. Back to when Minsok wasn't just a gangster. Back to Seoul's shadow economy, where his name was whispered like a prayer, quietly and only when necessary, a suit like armor, eyes like a verdict. The kind of man who could end careers with a phone call or end lives with none at all. But there was one thing Minsok couldn't control, his daughter. For 7 years, Hyun had lived inside a world that didn't answer back. No lullabies, no bedtime stories, no daddy ever spoken aloud. The best private specialists in Korea and abroad had used words like non-responsive, irreversible, acceptance. Even Minsok's own men had started calling her the silent princess. Not to be cruel, but because silence was the only thing that never betrayed them. Minsok told himself he didn't care what anyone thought, but every time Hyun looked past him like he was air, something in the most feared man in Gangnam cracked a little more. That was why he was at Maison Ara that night. Gold lighting, chandeliers, velvet curtains, rich people laughing like the world couldn't touch them. And that was where Amaka walked into his life with a tuning fork that made the room freeze. The metal shimmered with vibration, silent to everyone watching, but alive in the air between Amaka's hands. She struck it again gently, then did something that made even the bodyguard stiffen. She crouched in front of Hyun and pressed the base of the vibrating fork against the girl's collarbone. Instantly, Hyun went still. Her crying stopped mid-breath. Her eyes widened as if someone had switched the lights on inside her. The fear drained from her small face, replaced by something Min-seok hadn't seen in years: curiosity. Amaka struck the tuning fork again and pressed it to Hyun's wrist, then her elbow, then the tabletop beside her water glass. Hyun's fingertips followed the vibration like a moth following light, her small hands moving with sudden purpose. A shaky little smile tried to form on her lips and failed, then formed again, stronger this time. She touched the fork with cautious reverence, as if it were something sacred. And then, in the most shocking moment of the night, Hyun looked up at Min-seok, not past him, not through him, at him. Like she finally recognized he was there. The restaurant had shifted from fear silence to stunned silence, forks frozen halfway to mouths, conversations abandoned mid-sentence. Even the jazz music seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Min-seok didn't move. The feared man, the underworld king, stood completely still, as if the air had turned to glass around him. Amaka lifted her hands slowly, deliberately, and signed with careful clarity. Not fast, not fancy, just simple, deliberate gestures. Safe. Okay. Feel. Hyun watched, mesmerized. She copied the signs clumsily, her tiny fingers stumbling through the motions. Then she tapped her own chest with both hands, a sign that meant, I understand. I'm here. Min-seok's throat worked like he was swallowing something sharp. Who are you? He asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge. Amaka carefully placed the tuning fork back into its case, her hands no longer trembling. My name is Amaka, she said, and I used to help my cousin learn to navigate sound without hearing it. Min-seok stared at his daughter, who was now calm, her palm pressed flat to the table, as if the restaurant had become a musical instrument only she could play. His men watched their boss closely, confused. Because they had seen Min-seok survive knives, betrayals, police raids, rival families trying to take his territory, but they had never seen him look like this, like a man realizing his greatest weakness wasn't his enemies, it was his ignorance. That's when Amaka noticed it, a tattoo creeping above Min-seok's collar, not decorative, but deliberate, symbols she'd seen in news reports about organized crime. And the way his bodyguards positioned themselves wasn't protective, it was tactical. Eyes scanning exits, hands near concealed weapons, movements synchronized like a military unit. This wasn't just a VIP. This was someone dangerous. Min-seok slowly reached into his jacket. Amaka tensed. The bodyguards tensed. Mr. Park, watching from across the room, looked like he might faint. But Min-seok didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a black card. No logo, no name, only a number embossed in silver. You finish your shift, Min-seok said, his eyes still on Hyun. Then you come with me. Amaka's heart dropped. Sir, You don't understand, he interrupted, voice turning raw. For years, I paid people to fix her. He looked up at Amaka, and for the first time that night, she saw something human in his eyes. And you didn't fix her. He leaned closer. You found her. Hyun tapped the table again, softly, rhythmically, waiting for the next vibration like she was waiting for a conversation to continue. 3 hours later, Amaka stepped out of Maison Ara's employee entrance into the cold soul night, her apron folded in her bag, the black card heavy in her pocket. A black car idled at the curb, tinted windows, engine purring. The back door opened. Min-seok sat inside, Hyun asleep against his shoulder. Get in, he said. And Amaka realized with a chill that crawled up her spine. She wasn't being offered a job. She was being taken into a world she couldn't leave. The car didn't take her to a neighborhood. It took her to a compound. High walls topped with security cameras. Guards in dark suits stationed at intervals like chess pieces. Motion sensors glinting in the landscaping. The kind of place that didn't appear on any map, where screams wouldn't carry and questions wouldn't be answered. Amaka's hands gripped her bag tighter as the gate rolled shut behind them with a finality that sounded like a prison door closing. Min-seok's residence wasn't a home. It was a fortress disguised as luxury. Marble floors that swallowed footsteps. Floor-to-ceiling windows with bulletproof glass. Art on the walls that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, but every piece positioned to avoid blocking sightlines to the doors. A man in wireframe glasses met them in the foyer, holding a leather folder. "Sign," Min-seok said, gesturing to the documents inside. "Standard terms." Amaka scanned the pages. Her student debt, gone. Monthly salary that made her waitressing wage look like pocket change. Confidentiality clauses thick as a novel. And buried in the middle, failure to comply with security protocols may result in termination of contract and life. The last two words weren't actually written there, but Amaka could read between the lines. "I'm not here to fix her," Amaka said, looking up from the papers. "I need you to understand that." Min-seok's expression didn't change. "Then what are you here to do?" "Reach her." Amaka set the pen down. "There's a difference." For a long moment, Min-seok studied her face like he was trying to determine if she was brave or simply stupid. Then he nodded once. "You have 3 weeks to prove you're worth the risk I'm taking." The room they'd prepared for Hyun's sessions was on the second floor. Spacious, sound-dampened, equipped with things that clearly hadn't worked. Abandoned communication boards, untouched toys designed for deaf children, expensive therapy equipment gathering dust. Hyun sat on a cushioned mat in the center, still wearing her pink dress, eyes distant. Amaka knelt beside her and pulled items from her bag. Balloons, a small drum, and the tuning fork. She inflated a balloon slowly, then placed it in Hyun's hands and tapped it with her fingertips. The vibration traveled through the rubber, gentle and rhythmic. Hyun's eyes focused. She tapped the balloon back, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. Amaka smiled and moved to the low table nearby. She drummed her fingers against the wood. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 taps, a pattern. Hyun watched, mesmerized. She placed her palm flat on the table, feeling the vibrations travel through the surface. Then she copied the rhythm, her small hand tapping out the same sequence. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. It wasn't language yet, but it was communication. From the doorway, Min-seok stood watching, silent, still, an outsider to his own child's breakthrough. His jaw was tight, hands clenched at his sides like he wanted to do something but didn't know what. Amaka struck the tuning fork and pressed it to Hyun's palm. The girl's face lit up with recognition. She took the fork carefully, reverently, and looked around the room as if trying to decide what to do with this gift. Then she walked to her father. Min-seok tensed. Hyun pressed the vibrating tuning fork against his hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Father and daughter, connected by nothing but a humming piece of metal and 7 years of silence. Then Min-seok's face cracked. Not broken, opened. He knelt slowly, bringing himself to Hyun's eye level, and the girl pressed the fork to his chest. She felt his heartbeat mixed with the vibration, and something in her expression shifted. Like she was finally understanding that this man, this stranger who shared her home, was alive. Was there. Hyun signed clumsily, "Feel." Min-seok's voice came out rough. "I feel it." "She's not empty," Amaka said softly from across the room. "She's untranslated. There's a whole person in there. She just needs someone to learn her language instead of forcing her to learn yours." Min-seok didn't respond. He stayed kneeling, his daughter's hand still pressed to his chest, as if moving might shatter whatever fragile bridge had just been built. That night, Amaka was settling into the guest room they'd assigned her, luxurious but sterile, like a 5-star cell, when shouting erupted downstairs. Footsteps thundered through hallways, doors slammed. She cracked her door open and heard Min-seok's voice, cold and sharp. "How many?" 4 locations hit simultaneously, a guard responded. "They're sending a message." "Lockdown protocol, now." "Sir, there's something else." A pause, heavy, suffocating. "They know about Hyun." Amaka's blood turned to ice. She watched through the crack as Min-seok's face transformed from concerned father back to the feared man who ran Seoul's underworld. All emotion locked away, replaced by calculated fury. "Double the perimeter guards," Min-seok ordered. No one in or out without my authorization, and find out who talked. His eyes flicked toward the stairs, toward where Hyun slept, and where Amaka now stood frozen behind her door. The message was clear. The fortress had just become a cage, and outside its walls, someone was coming for the silent princess. Min-seok returned just before dawn. Amaka heard the commotion from her room. Urgent voices, the heavy thud of boots on marble, orders issued in clipped Korean. She pulled on a robe and stepped into the hallway just as two guards half-carried their boss through the foyer. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder. Blood soaked through his white shirt sleeve, dark and spreading. But his face remained composed, jaw set, eyes sharp, every muscle controlled, despite what must have been considerable pain. "I'm fine," Min-seok growled, shaking off the guards. "Return to your posts." "Sir, you need—" "Now." The guards hesitated, then obeyed. Because even bleeding, even injured, Min-seok was still the man who commanded absolute authority. He turned and saw Amaka standing at the top of the stairs. "Go back to bed," he said. "You're bleeding on your imported marble," Amaka replied, descending the steps. "Sit down before you pass out and ruin the aesthetic." For a moment she thought he might actually refuse, but then something shifted in his expression. Exhaustion, maybe, or the simple relief of someone else making a decision. He sat heavily in one of the foyer chairs. Amaka disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a first aid kit she'd spotted earlier, the kind that was far too comprehensive for normal household accidents. Antiseptic, surgical thread, sterile gauze, supplies for a home where violence was an occupational hazard. She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound on his arm. It was deep but clean, a blade, not a bullet. She threaded the needle without hesitation. "You've done this before," Min-seok observed, watching her hands. "My cousin wasn't just deaf," Amaka said, beginning the first stitch. "She lived in a rough neighborhood. You learn to patch people up when hospitals ask too many questions." Min-seok didn't flinch as the needle pierced skin. "The rivals aren't just pushing territory anymore, they're pushing narrative." "Meaning?" His jaw tightened. "In my world, perception is survival. They're spreading a story, that I've gone soft, that I have a weakness they can smell." He paused, the words clearly tasting bitter. "A man with a silent child who can't even look at him, they're calling it proof I've lost my edge." Amaka tied off the stitch and started another. "So your enemies are using your daughter against you." "They're using my failure against me." Min-seok's voice dropped lower. "A boss who can't even reach his own child. What kind of man is that?" "What kind of threat?" "The kind who's human," Amaka said, meeting his eyes. "You think that's weakness?" "In my world?" "Yes." Amaka finished the final stitch and set the needle aside. She cleaned her hands methodically with antiseptic before speaking again. "Hyun is not your weakness, Min-seok." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Your refusal to understand her, that's what makes you vulnerable, because you're so busy hiding her like a liability that you can't see she's the only honest thing in your entire world." Min-seok stared at her, something dangerous flickering behind his eyes. Not anger, but something more complicated. "You speak very freely for someone in my house. You brought me here to help your daughter. That means telling you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." Before Min-seok could respond, a small sound came from the stairs. Hyun stood on the landing, still in her nightgown, eyes wide with fear. She couldn't hear the voices, but she could sense the tension, see the blood on her father's clothes, feel the vibrations of urgency that had filled the house all night. Her hands began to shake, her breathing quickened. "Hyun—" Min-seok started to stand, but Amaka stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. She crossed to the stairs and knelt at Hyun's level. Slowly, she signed, "Safe, Daddy, safe." "Okay." Hyun's eyes darted to her father, to the blood, back to Amaka. Amaka pulled out her tuning fork, struck it gently, and pressed it to Hyun's hand. The vibration cut through the panic, giving the girl something tangible to focus on. Gradually, Hyun's breathing slowed. She touched her own chest, then pointed at Min-seok with a question in her eyes. Amaka nodded and guided Hyun down the stairs. The girl approached her father cautiously, then placed her small hand over his bandaged arm, not pressing, just touching, feeling his warmth, confirming he was real, he was there, he was alive. Min-seok's controlled expression finally cracked. He pulled his daughter close, and for once, she didn't pull away. Later, after Hyun had been coaxed back to bed, Min-seok stood in his office while one of his lieutenants delivered a report Amaka couldn't fully hear from the hallway, but she caught fragments, inside information, knew exactly which wrote, "Someone close." When the lieutenant left, Min-seok's voice called out, "You can stop pretending you're not listening." Amaka stepped into the doorway. Min-seok stood at the window, looking out over his fortress. "They knew where I'd be tonight, which car, which route. That information doesn't leak by accident. You have a traitor. I have a problem." He turned to face her. "And I've decided how to solve it." Something about his tone made Amaka's stomach tighten. "How?" "I'm taking Hyun out tomorrow. One controlled outing. Somewhere public, somewhere visible." His eyes were hard, calculating. "I'm going to prove my daughter is not a liability, that I am not weak." "That's insane. Someone just tried to kill you." "Which is exactly why I need to show strength." Min-seok's voice was ice. "In my world, hiding is the same as surrender." Amaka stepped forward. "Then I'm coming with you." "No. Hyun trusts me. If you want her calm and present, you need me there." Min-seok studied her for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, 2:00. Dress appropriately." As Amaka turned to leave, she caught the look in his eyes, the one he tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. He wasn't just taking Hyun out to prove a point. He was walking into a trap, and he knew it. The Botanical Conservatory was a cathedral of light and green, curved glass walls that bent sunlight into rainbows, orchids hanging like jewels, paths lined with white stones that gleamed like pearls. The kind of place rich people visited to feel cultured, where every angle was designed for photographs that would make others envious. Min-seok had reserved the entire space, no other visitors, just his guards positioned strategically at every entrance, trying to look casual in their dark suits among the tropical foliage. Hyun was transformed. She moved through the garden with wonder Amaka had never seen before, fingers trailing over velvet petals, palms pressed against warm glass to feel the sun's heat, eyes wide as she discovered a pond where koi swam in lazy circles. The vibrations here were gentle, natural, water trickling, leaves rustling in the controlled breeze, her own footsteps on stone. For the first time since Amaka had met her, Hyun looked like a child instead of a prisoner. "She's never been like this," Min-seok said quietly, standing beside Amaka near a display of violet orchids. "She's never been somewhere that didn't overwhelm her," Amaka replied. "Your world is all sharp edges and harsh sounds. This place is soft." Min-seok watched his daughter crouch by the pond, her reflection rippling in the water. "I thought keeping her inside was protecting her. I thought the world was too dangerous, too complicated." "You were half right. The world is dangerous." Amaka turned to look at him. "But keeping her from it doesn't make her safer. It just makes her more vulnerable when danger finds her anyway." Their eyes met, a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Gratitude mixed with something else, something neither of them had names for yet. Connection forged in crisis. Understanding built on broken assumptions. "Thank you," Min-seok said, and the words sounded like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep. "For seeing what I couldn't." Before Amaka could respond, Hyun made a sound, not words, but an urgent vocalization that pulled both adults' attention. The girl was standing now, staring upward at something beyond the glass dome, her small hand lifted, pointing, then signing clumsily but deliberately. "Bad." Amaka followed her gaze and saw it, a glint of light from the building across the street, too sharp, too focused. A reflection that wasn't reflection at all, but scope glass catching sun. "Get down!" Amaka shouted, already moving. The crack came instantly, loud enough that even in her silent world, Hyun felt it. Glass exploded above them in a shower of crystalline rain. A bullet had punched through the conservatory dome, missing Minseok's head by inches, embedding itself in the marble statue behind him. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward, weapons drawn, shouting coordinates. Minseok grabbed both Amaka and Haeyoon, pulling them behind a concrete planter as another shot shattered more glass. Haeyoon was screaming, that raw, untrained sound of pure terror. Her hands clamped over her ears, even though she couldn't hear the gunshots. She could feel them, the percussion in her chest, the vibration of shattering glass, the violent tremors of running feet. Her whole body shook with sensory overload. Amaka wedged herself between Haeyoon and the chaos. With trembling hands, she pulled out the tuning fork, struck it against the stone planter, and pressed it to Haeyoon's collarbone. The vibration cut through the panic. Familiar, safe, grounding. Haeyoon's eyes locked onto Amaka's face like a drowning person finding a rope. Amaka signed slowly, deliberately, even as her own heart hammered. Safe. I'm here. Breathe. Around them, guards were evacuating the area, checking sight lines, securing exits, but in their small shelter behind the planter. A different kind of crisis was being managed. The 7-year-old girl, whose nervous system was trying to process violence, it had no framework to understand. Minseok watched Amaka work with something approaching awe. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, keeping one arm around Haeyoon. A message from an unknown number, just 4 lines, cut the anchor. The ship sails free. She drowns him. Remove her. Minseok's face went completely still. That dangerous stillness Amaka had learned meant he was at his most lethal. What is it? She asked. Minseok's jaw worked. He looked at Haeyoon, still calming in Amaka's arms, then back at the message. They're not trying to kill me, he said, voice hollow. They're trying to force my hand. I don't understand. The message is clear. Minseok's eyes were dark with rage and something worse. Fear. They're saying Haeyoon makes me weak, that she's an anchor dragging me down. He looked at Amaka. They're telling me to choose, my empire or my daughter. The conservatory had gone quiet except for the sound of guards sweeping the perimeter and broken glass crunching underfoot. Haeyoon pressed closer to Amaka, her small hand finding the tuning fork and holding it like a talisman. And if you don't choose? Amaka asked, though she already knew the answer. Minseok's expression was granite. Then they'll make the choice for me. He stood slowly, helping Amaka and Haeyoon to their feet. His guards immediately surrounded them, forming a human shield as they moved toward the exit. But Amaka saw what the guards didn't. Minseok's hand shaking as he deleted the message. The most feared man in Seoul had just been given an ultimatum. And the target wasn't wearing a suit. She was 7 years old, wearing a yellow dress and holding a tuning fork like it was the only safe thing in a world that had just tried to kill her father. They moved fast through the service corridor, Minseok leading, 2 guards flanking, Amaka carrying Haeyoon, whose face was buried against her shoulder. The girl's entire body trembled with aftershock, small hands fisted in Amaka's blouse. Service exit, 30 meters, one guard reported into his radio. Vehicle standing by. The corridor was concrete and fluorescent lights, utilitarian, ugly, but defensible. Their footsteps echoed too loud. Haeyoon flinched with each reverberating sound. Minseok moved like a man conducting warfare, every step calculated. He checked corners, read his guards' positions, his mind already 3 moves ahead. They were almost to the exit when the radio crackled with static and a panicked voice. Second shooter, west stairwell. The words cut off. Minseok's head snapped up. Move! Now! But they were boxed in. The corridor only had 2 directions, and both were suddenly compromised. Through the small window in the service door ahead, Amaka saw movement. A shadow crossing the loading dock outside. Behind them, footsteps. Fast, getting closer. They're channeling us, Minseok said, voice deadly calm. He turned to the lead guard. Take them through the maintenance access. I'll draw fire toward the main corridor. Sir, that's not a discussion. Minseok's eyes flicked to Amaka. Keep her safe. Get to the vehicle. Don't stop. He was going to make himself the target, pull the danger away from his daughter by offering himself instead. Amaka saw the calculation in his eyes, the cold math of a man who'd spent his life making impossible choices. He was choosing Hyun's life over his own, and he was doing it without hesitation. The guard started to protest, but Min Seok was already moving, stepping into the intersection of corridors with his arms slightly raised, visible, exposed, drawing attention like a lightning rod. A shot cracked from the west stairwell. The bullet hit the wall beside Min Seok's head, spraying concrete dust. He didn't flinch. He was buying seconds, giving his guards time to evacuate Hyun through the maintenance route. But then Amaka saw it, the angle the guard missed, the second shooter in the opposite direction. A man emerging from the east corridor, weapon raised, sightline clear, lined up perfectly on Min Seok's back. Time fractured into horrible clarity, the shooter's finger tightening on the trigger. Min Seok's attention fixed on the wrong direction. Hyun's face pressed against Amaka's shoulder, blind to the danger. The guards turning, but too slow, too far. Amaka moved, not thinking, not choosing, just moving. She pushed Hyun into the guard's arms and launched herself forward, her body intercepting the space between the shooter and Min Seok's back. The impact felt like being hit by a car, a crushing force that stole her breath and knocked her sideways. No pain yet, just pressure and the sensation of falling. She collapsed. Min Seok spun around, and for one frozen second, his expression shattered, shock cutting through years of practiced control. Amaka! He caught her before she hit the concrete, his hand suddenly gentle despite their strength. Around them, chaos exploded. Guards returning fire, the shooter going down, reinforcements flooding the corridor. But all of it became background noise. Hyun was screaming. Not the overwhelmed cry of sensory panic, but raw terror. A child watching someone she trusted crumple like a broken doll. She struggled against the guard holding her, small hands reaching desperately for Amaka. "Stay with me," Min Seok said, his voice rough and cracking on the edges. Blood was seeping through Amaka's shirt, too much, too fast, but his hand pressed against the wound with practiced pressure. "Amaka, stay with me." Her vision was graying at the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. But through the fog she saw Hyun's face, terrified, lost, drowning in a crisis she couldn't hear or understand. With shaking hands, Amaka reached into her pocket. The tuning fork, still there, miraculously undamaged. She struck it weakly against the floor, the vibration barely registering, but she lifted it toward Hyun. The guard understood and brought the girl closer. Amaka pressed the humming fork against Hyun's small palm. The vibration cut through the child's panic just enough. Hyun's eyes locked onto Amaka's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Amaka signed clumsily, her hands barely cooperating. "Safe. You safe." Then her hand fell. The tuning fork clattered to the concrete. "No." Min Seok's voice was command and plea all at once. "Not like this. You don't get to—" But Amaka's eyes were already closing. The private medical room was sterile and quiet. No hospital name, no official records. Just the kind of facility people like Min Seok used when questions couldn't be asked and authorities couldn't be involved. Machines beeped steadily. IV lines snaked across white sheets. Amaka lay unconscious, her breathing shallow but stable. The bullet had been removed, the damage contained, but the doctor's words echoed in the silence. Touch and go. The next 12 hours will tell. Min Seok sat beside the bed like a statue carved from stone. His suit was still stained with her blood. His hands, usually so controlled, were clenched into fists on his knees. Hyun was curled against his side, exhausted into silence, her small hand clutching the tuning fork that had been cleaned and returned to her. One of Min Seok's lieutenants stood in the doorway. "Sir, we've secured the site. The shooters were hired contractors. No direct connection yet, but we're tracing the money trail." Min Seok didn't look up. "Find who paid them. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it costs." And then? Then they learn what happens when you make me choose between my empire and my daughter. His voice was soft but lethal. "They made me realize I'd burn the entire empire before I'd sacrifice her, and I'll burn them first." The lieutenant nodded and left. Alone again, except for Hayoon and the woman who'd taken a bullet meant for him, Min-seok finally allowed himself to exhale, a shaking breath that carried the weight of everything he'd never said. "If you live," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Amaka or making a vow to the universe itself, "I change everything." Hayoon stirred against him, and he pulled her closer. Outside the window, Seoul glittered like it always did, ruthless and beautiful and indifferent to the small miracles happening in private rooms where monsters learn to be human. 4 days after the shooting, Amaka woke to the sound of paper rustling. She'd been drifting in and out of consciousness, morphine dreams mixing with reality, pain held at bay by medication and the steady vigilance of nurses who never asked her name. But this time, when her eyes opened, everything was sharp and clear. Min-seok sat in the chair beside her bed, dressed in a fresh suit, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept much. Beside him stood a thin man in wire-frame glasses, holding a leather portfolio. "You're awake," Min-seok said. Not a question. An observation made with something that might have been relief. "Hayoon?" Amaka's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Safe. Downstairs with 2 guards. She won't leave the building until you do." He paused. "She's been asking for you, in her way." The lawyer cleared his throat softly. "Sir, perhaps we should wait until—" "No." Min-seok's tone left no room for argument. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Amaka, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to do will change everything, for you, for Hayoon, for my organization, but you took a bullet meant for me, and that means something in my world." He gestured to the lawyer, who opened the portfolio and pulled out documents. Thick, official, intimidating. "These are transfer papers," Min-seok continued. "I'm signing over 60% of my total worth to you. Properties, accounts, investments, all legally transferred, all irreversible." Amaka's mind struggled to process the words. That's insane. I don't want... It's not about what you want. It's about what you've earned." Min-seok's voice was firm. "In my world, debts are paid. You saved my life. You gave my daughter something I couldn't. A way to exist in this world. That's worth more than money." The lawyer interjected nervously. "Sir, I must advise you again that this action will have significant ramifications. Your rivals will see this as exactly what it is," Min-seok interrupted. "A declaration that some things matter more than power." He looked at Amaka. "The documents also include guardianship provisions for Hayoon. If anything happens to me, her care, her safety, is tied to your protection. You'll have the resources and legal authority to keep her from the people who would use her against me." "You're making me a target," Amaka said quietly. "I'm making you untouchable." Min-seok's eyes were hard. "Anyone who comes after you comes after 60% of my empire. That makes you more valuable alive than dead, to everyone, including my enemies." The lawyer placed the documents on the rolling table beside Amaka's bed. "If you sign, Ms. Amaka, you'll become one of the wealthiest individuals in South Korea. You'll also become permanently connected to Mr. Min-seok's world. There is no walking away from this." Amaka stared at the papers, at the man who'd brought them, at the impossible choice being laid before her. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll have the documents drawn up in Hayoon's name instead," Min-seok said. "But that makes her the target. This way, the danger points at you, someone who's already proven they can survive it." He leaned closer. "I'm not asking you to love this world, Amaka. I'm asking you to let me protect you the only way I know how." The lawyer produced a pen. Min-seok took it and signed first, his name bold and decisive across the bottom of each page. Then he handed the pen to Amaka. Her hand trembled as she took it. "This will start a war." "The war already started the moment they tried to kill my daughter." Min-seok's voice was cold. "I'm just choosing my side." Amaka signed. The lawyer witnessed, notarized, and sealed the documents with the efficiency of someone who'd learned not to question his employer's decisions. When he left, He looked like a man walking away from a funeral. "It's done," Min-seok said quietly. "The moment those documents are filed, every criminal organization in Seoul will know. I've chosen an anchor." By evening, the underworld was buzzing. Word spread through back channels and encrypted messages. Min-seok had transferred 60% of his wealth to a foreign waitress. The silent princess's caretaker was now one of the richest women in the country. The untouchable boss had made himself vulnerable, and his rivals circled like sharks sensing blood. Downstairs, Hyun finally got her wish. The guards brought her to Amaka's room, and the little girl climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of the IV lines and bandages. She looked at Amaka with those wide, dark eyes, so much like her father's, and signed with careful deliberation, "Home." Not a question, a statement. Amaka felt tears prick her eyes. She signed back, "Yes, home." Hyun smiled, a real smile, bright and uncomplicated, and pressed her palm gently against Amaka's chest, feeling her heartbeat, confirming she was alive, she was real, she was there. Min-seok watched from the doorway, and something in his expression cracked open. He wasn't just giving money or legal protection. He was giving trust, the kind that couldn't be bought or commanded, the kind that only existed when someone proved they'd burn for you, bleed for you, stay when every logical reason said to run. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number, another message. Min-seok's face went cold as he read it. "You gave her 60%. We'll take 100%, starting with her." He deleted the message and looked at Amaka, still weak, still recovering, now carrying a target the size of his entire empire on her back. "Double the guard rotation," he said into his phone. "No one gets within 50 meters of this building without full clearance. And find me every person who knew about the document signing." Because someone inside his organization was feeding information to his enemies, and that someone had just signed Amaka's death warrant. "There's only one way to make you untouchable," Min-seok said. They were in the penthouse suite of the private medical facility. Amaka strong enough now to sit in a chair by the window, watching Seoul's lights blur into constellation patterns below. Hyun was asleep in the next room, guarded by men who would die before letting anyone through the door. "You've already given me 60% of your empire," Amaka replied. "How much more untouchable can I get?" "Money makes you a target. Status makes you a shield." Min-seok stood across from her, hands in his pockets, looking like a man about to negotiate the most important contract of his life. "In my world, there are rules, lines people won't cross. One of them is this: you don't touch a boss's wife." The word hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Amaka stared at him. "You're asking me to marry you." "I'm asking you to let me protect you the only way that will work." His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a strategist, not a romantic. "Marriage gives you legitimacy. It makes you family, not just an employee or a transaction. It tells every crew in Seoul that harming you is the same as declaring war on me directly." "That's insane." "It's survival." Min-seok moved closer, his expression unreadable. "They've already threatened you twice. The document signing made you valuable, but it also made you vulnerable. Marriage makes you sacred. In the underworld, that distinction matters." Amaka shook her head, struggling to process. "I didn't save you for a reward, Min-seok. I didn't take that bullet so you'd feel obligated to. This isn't obligation." His voice cut through her protest, suddenly raw. "You gave my daughter the ability to breathe. You made her look at me like I matter. You stood between me and a bullet without hesitation." He paused, and something in his controlled facade cracked. "I'm not offering marriage because I owe you. I'm offering it because I can't protect what matters most to me if you're standing outside my world." "And what matters most to you?" "Hyun." He said it without hesitation. "And you're the only person who's ever been able to reach her. That makes you irreplaceable. That makes you worth more than 60% of my empire. It makes you worth all of it." Amaka felt tears burning behind her eyes. "This isn't how marriage is supposed to work." "I'm not offering you romance," Min-seok said quietly. "I'm offering you armor, a vow, legitimacy in a world that respects nothing else. He knelt slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. But I'm also offering you truth. Without you, my daughter is lost, and I will do anything, to keep her found. Outside the window, the city glittered with indifference. Inside the room, a woman who'd come to Seoul to escape debt was being asked to marry into an empire built on violence. If I say yes, Amaka whispered, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment you used that tuning fork, Min-seok replied. You were already part of this. I'm just making it official. The ceremony happened 3 days later in Min-seok's fortress, not in a church or courthouse, but in the private study where he conducted business that would never see legal documentation. No guests, no celebration, just the lawyer with his documents, 2 guards as witnesses, and Hye-yoon sitting at the table with her tuning fork clutched in both hands. Amaka wore a simple dress, cream-colored, elegant, borrowed from somewhere in Min-seok's network of resources. Min-seok wore the same black suit he always wore, but his tie was different, deep blue, the color of trust in Korean tradition. The lawyer read the legal language, binding contracts that merged their lives on paper, protection clauses that made Amaka's safety a matter of organizational priority. Guardianship documents that ensured Hye-yoon would never be used as a pawn again. When it came time for vows, Min-seok didn't use traditional words. I vow to protect you with everything I have, he said, his voice steady. I vow to honor what you've given my daughter. I vow that anyone who threatens you will answer to me. Amaka's hands trembled as she responded. I vow to keep Hye-yoon safe. I vow to never betray what you've trusted me with. I vow to stand beside you, even when the world says I shouldn't. The lawyer produced rings, simple bands, no diamonds, no ostentation, just metal that signified binding. Hye-yoon watched from her seat, not understanding the words, but sensing the weight of the moment. When the rings were exchanged, she did something unexpected. She picked up her tuning fork, struck it against the table, and tapped out a rhythm, deliberate, careful, almost ceremonial. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps again. The same pattern Amaka had taught her in their first session, the rhythm that meant, I'm here, I understand, I'm with you. It was the only blessing that mattered. Min-seok looked at his daughter, then at his wife, a woman he'd known for less than 3 weeks, who now legally shared everything he'd built across decades. It's done, the lawyer said quietly, sealing the documents. Within hours, word spread through Seoul's underworld like wildfire. Min-seok had married the foreign woman. The waitress was now the boss's wife. The anchor had become the hull of the ship. Some crews saw it as weakness, others saw it as a warning. But one crew saw it as a final insult, the last straw in a series of humiliations that demanded response. That night, Min-seok's phone lit up with a message from a number he recognized, his oldest rival, the one who'd been circling since Hye-yoon's existence became public knowledge. You married your weakness. Now we know exactly where to strike. One last chance. Give us the territory, or we take everything. Min-seok read the message twice, then looked at Amaka, his wife now, legally and strategically, sitting across from him with Hye-yoon asleep against her shoulder. He made a decision. No more warnings, he said into his phone. No more messages. Find them, all of them. His lieutenant's voice crackled back. Sir, if we move that aggressively, I said find them. Min-seok's voice was ice and iron. This ends tomorrow. He hung up and looked at Amaka. Tomorrow this war is over, he said, one way or another. The counter-move was surgical. Min-seok didn't meet his rivals with violence. He met them with information. Every piece of intelligence they'd leaked, every insider they'd bribed, every move they'd telegraphed thinking he was distracted by his weakness. He'd been documenting it all. In one night, he dismantled their operation not with bullets, but with evidence delivered to the right authorities, assets frozen through legal channels they didn't know he controlled, and alliances shifted through conversations held in rooms where his rivals had no access. By morning, the crew that had threatened Amaka and Hye-yoon was scattered, their leadership facing charges they couldn't buy their way out of. their territory absorbed by organizations that owed Minseok favors, their power evaporated like mist under sun. The real victory wasn't blood. It was control reclaimed through the very thing they'd mocked: his willingness to think beyond violence, to adapt, to learn a different kind of strength. His rivals had expected the wolf. He'd given them the strategist. 2 weeks later, Seoul's elite gathered at the Shilla Hotel for a charity gala. The kind of event where wealthy families showed off their philanthropy and business deals were made between champagne toasts. And Minseok had never attended before. His world didn't mix with this one. But tonight was different. Tonight, he walked through the gilded doors with his wife on one arm and his daughter holding his other hand. Amaka wore a gown that transformed her, midnight blue silk that caught the light, her locks styled elegantly, moving with the confidence of a woman who'd survived a bullet and a merger into a world that should have crushed her. The 60% of Minseok's wealth she now controlled made her one of the most powerful women in the room, whether anyone knew it or not. Haeyoon wore a white dress with small flowers embroidered along the hem, and she walked without fear. Her small hand secure in her father's, her eyes curious rather than overwhelmed. The ballroom was magnificent: crystal chandeliers, a grand piano on a raised platform, tables set with precision that spoke of old money and older expectations. People stared, whispered, the underworld boss and his foreign wife, and the daughter no one had ever seen in public. Minseok led them to a table near the front, his bodyguards positioned discreetly around the perimeter. Then came the moment he'd planned. The MC announced a special performance, a demonstration of alternative musical expression by a young participant in the gala's featured charity, a program for deaf children. Haeyoon stood with Amaka's gentle encouragement and walked to the platform. The crowd went silent, polite, curious, confused. On the platform sat not just the grand piano, but something unusual: a large drum, several tuning forks of different sizes mounted on stands, and a series of wooden blocks arranged in a pattern. Amaka joined Haeyoon on stage, kneeling beside her. She struck the largest tuning fork and pressed it to the piano's soundboard. The vibration traveled through the wood, and Haeyoon placed both palms flat against the instrument's side. Her face lit up with recognition. Then Haeyoon began to play. Not music as the audience understood it. She couldn't hear the notes, but she could feel them. Her small fingers pressed keys deliberately, creating patterns of vibration that rippled through the piano's body. She moved to the drum, striking it with her palm to feel the percussion travel up her arm. She touched the wooden blocks arranged by size, feeling how each one resonated differently. She was composing with vibration, creating a language the audience could hear, but she experienced through touch. The crowd was transfixed. This wasn't pity. This wasn't tragedy. This was a child demonstrating that her world wasn't silent. It was simply translated differently. Amaka signed to Haeyoon, safe, okay, feel. And Haeyoon, confident now, connected now, signed back with perfect clarity, her small hands forming the shapes like she'd been doing it her whole life. Then she did something more. She walked to the edge of the platform and signed directly to the audience, her movements careful and deliberate. I hear different. Not broken. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. But Minseok wasn't looking at the crowd. He was staring at his daughter, his eyes bright with tears he refused to wipe, his jaw tight with emotion he'd spent a lifetime learning to suppress. Amaka caught his gaze from the stage, and she saw it. The feared man, the underworld king, the strategist who controlled empires, completely undone by 7-year-old girl who'd just shown the world she existed on her own terms. When Haeyoon returned to their table, she climbed into her father's lap, something she'd never done before, and placed her small hand over his heart, feeling his heartbeat, confirming he was there, confirming he was real to her now. Minseok wrapped his arms around her and whispered into her hair, "I'm sorry I took so long to understand." Amaka reached across the table and took his hand, and Haeyoon, sensing the connection, placed her small hand on top of both of theirs. 3 hands, 3 people, connected by something stronger than blood. the choice to learn each other's language instead of demanding translation. Later that night, after the gala ended and they returned to the fortress that no longer felt like a prison, Min-seok stood in Hyun's doorway, watching Amaka tuck their daughter into bed. The tuning fork rested on the nightstand, a talisman, a tool, a bridge between worlds. She never needed fixing, Amaka said quietly, joining him in the doorway. No, Min-seok agreed. I did. He took Amaka's hand, his wife, his partner, the woman who'd taken a bullet for him and given him something more valuable than empire, the ability to see his daughter clearly. Thank you, he said simply. Outside, Seoul glittered like it always did, ruthless and beautiful and indifferent. But inside the fortress, 3 people had found something the city couldn't touch. A family built not on perfection, but on the willingness to translate instead of fix, to understand instead of change, to meet someone in their world rather than drag them into yours. Hyun didn't need a new world. She needed someone willing to translate this one. And in the end, that made all the difference.